There is something almost unbearable about the way history writes it down. Survived, lost. Two words beside a name, as if that explains what happened to a life. One person got older, the other stayed the same age forever. One person had to keep becoming someone, and the other became a memory. I don't know if there's a clean word for that feeling. It isn't just grief, and it's not exactly guilt. It's the strange weight of receiving years someone else was denied. Because surviving a tragedy doesn't mean the tragedy's over. Sometimes it means you become the place where it keeps going. That's the feeling Titanic understands before the love story even begins. Director James Cameron tells us Rose survives before he tells us how. Cameron opens with the older version of Rose. We meet her before we meet her younger self, before Jack, and before everything we know happens after. I used to think this was just a framing device, a way to organize a flashback. But the more I sit with this film, the less I believe that. The question was never whether Rose lives through the sinking. The question is whether she lives after surviving it. But we have to go back first. When we first meet the younger version of Rose, she doesn't appear broken. She's not empty or waiting for someone to hand her an identity. She has opinions and a restlessness she has learned to perform as composure. What she doesn't have is permission. Permission to live as a self that is already in there, restless and quietly suffocating. Her engagement at Cal Hockley is clearly not love, and the film never pretends otherwise. Her mother arranged it as financial survival dressed up as romance. Cal himself doesn't want Rose in any real sense. He wants to own something beautiful and call it devotion. Rose knows the difference between those two things. She's always known, which is probably what makes it so unbearable. The social world she moves through treats her as something to be arranged and displayed, but not truly seen. Her attempted suicide at the stern proves the catastrophe has already started before the iceberg ever arrives. The ship hasn't sunk yet, and Rose is standing at the railing in the dark because she's already drowning. Jack Dawson doesn't save Rose from that place. I want to be precise here because it matters to the whole argument I'm trying to make. He doesn't give her a personality or an identity. She has all those things already. What Jack does is something more specific. He watches her perform to the world and recognizes it for what it is without making it weird or inconvenient. He treats her imagination, her fear, and her restlessness as meaningful rather than something that has to be managed. He doesn't create Rose. He reflects Rose back to herself. Cal gives Rose the heart of the ocean as proof that she belongs to him. It's a gift, but it's also a shackle. And then Rose puts the diamond on for Jack. She decides how she'll exist in someone else's eyes. For the first time in the film, she's not the object of a wealthy man. She's a subject of her own image. And when Jack draws her, he draws what he actually sees, not the ornament, not the performance, the real person. I think that the drawing scene is not about being looked at. It's about Rose finally being recognized for who she really is. And then the iceberg hits, and Rose is in a lifeboat. She could survive by returning to Cal, returning to the life that was slowly erasing her. This is obviously the sensible choice to make, but she gets out of the lifeboat and goes back into the sinking ship with Jack. On paper, this is the stupidest choice Rose makes the entire film, but emotionally, it is the most honest and brave thing she's done. She's not choosing death. She's refusing to survive as a dead version of herself. She spent days being seen as a person rather than a possession, and the idea of climbing back into that lifeboat and letting the old life simply reclaim her is something she can't do. Safety and life are not always the same thing, and she knows that now in a way she can't unknow. You've probably felt some version of this, the choice that would protect everything on paper while quietly costing the part of yourself that made life feel worth protecting. Sometimes you sit with that tension for years. Rose only gets a few seconds. But here's where the film does a thing I think makes it genuinely devastating, and it doesn't get talked about nearly enough. In the cold water at the end, Jack doesn't ask Rose to remember him. He doesn't ask her to grieve him or stay loyal to his memory. He tells her she's gonna survive. She's going to get out. She's gonna have babies, grow old, and die warm in her bed. Not here. Not like this. He's describing a future he'll never touch and asking her to make it real. Every year Rose accumulates after this, Jack won't, and she says yes. She says the promise out loud, and she said she'll never let it go. Survival stops being just an outcome in that moment. It becomes a promise, and I think promises are heavier than grief, because they ask something from the living. Rose doesn't just survive the Titanic. She spends the rest of her life answering what Jack asked her to do in the cold. Sometimes the hardest part of surviving something is realizing it's not the ending. It's the beginning of a life you now have to answer for. Not to the world, but to yourself, and to the person who asked you to keep going when keeping going felt impossible. Old Rose has photographs beside her on the research vessel. I think James Cameron put them there to prove something, to prove that the promise was kept. Jack told her to live, and the photographs prove she did. Rose honored Jack by becoming the person he believed was still in there, and across 84 years she became someone impossible to reduce to the girl Cal tried to own. Maybe that's what we quietly hope for, the people we have lost. Not that we never move on, or that we keep everything perfectly preserved, but that some part of the life we kept building still carries the shape of what they gave us. There's another film that understands this in a completely different way. At the end of Saving Private Ryan, an old man stands in front of a grave and asks his wife to tell him he's lived a good life. And that line hurts because he's not really asking for a compliment. He's asking whether the life he lived was worthy. That's the same question Rose has been answering for 84 years. Just by living and becoming old, by filling the years Jack never got to touch with the same passion for life he showed. Rose survived and Jack didn't. And Rose spent the rest of her life trying to make that mean something. Because sometimes survival leaves you with a question nobody else can answer for you. Was the life enough? Did I carry it well? Did I become someone the person I lost would recognize? And then there's the diamond. Old Rose drops the heart of the ocean into the sea. She had it the whole time. It was worth a fortune, but she lets it go. She already did this once before, in the water after Jack sank. Rose lets go of his hand and watched him disappear. People have made a joke of that moment for almost 30 years, but the joke misunderstands the promise. Jack didn't ask her to hold his body. He asked her to hold the future he described. Letting go of him in the water wasn't betrayal. It was the first act of keeping the promise. Because she can't go in after him and also become the woman in the photographs. She had to release him to do what he asked. The diamond is the same gesture, 84 years later. She releases the object because she doesn't need the proof anymore. Her life already happened and the promise she made was already kept, so she lets it go. Not because it doesn't matter, but because it already did its work. I think that's why Titanic still hurts. Not because Jack and Rose never got a life together, but because somehow they did. It happened through her, through every photograph, every risk, every year she chose motion instead of memory alone. Jack gave Rose a promise, and Rose turned it into a life.